Okay, so the idea is to improve my photography. Multiple reasons I want to do that, but I actually don't remember why do I need to? Okay, let me put it this way. Something that you've told me multiple times is I have a very good eye. Like I can see the photo. I see the vision, and then I
struggle on the execution.
That's the word. Yeah.
Okay, so we're here today to work on your execution.
Yes. And also, no, okay, I have a confession. You don't hurt me.
I'm not a violent person.
You know how you've told me so many times what the f-stop ISO and everything means.
Oh no.
And I want to just add, I've also Googled it multiple times because I was afraid to ask you again, but I literally cannot remember.
Okay, let's start there. So really what this video is like a little crash course for anyone who's like, I love photography, but I don't know what I'm doing.
I love shooting in my camera's auto mode, except when it doesn't work, and then I'm really upset.
Let's start with ISO, shall we?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you remember about ISO?
I remember I think it's got to do with light. It's definitely got to do with light. Everything has to do with light. But like the lower ISO, I think lets in less light, and the higher numbers of ISO lets in more light.
I'm gonna stop you. You're
way off.
No, but you're mixing things.
Oops.
So ISO, fun fact, is actually a word. It's not a what's this? You're a wordy person. What's the
an initialism?
It's not an initialism, and it's not a.
Oh no, I got that one out of my head. It's not an acronym, not an initialism.
Yes, it's not an acronym and not an initialism. And so for bonus points, what's an initialism?
Okay, so you guys all know what an acronym is. An acronym is when you take like the first letter of each word and then you make a new word out of it. Like NASA, for example, is an acronym. But an initialism is something like FBI, where you pronounce each letter as an individual letter.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So ISO is actually a word. I'm going to apologize. I don't remember where the word came from, but it is actually a word. So it's not an initialism and it's not a acronym, even though some people will say ISO, that's actually technically incorrect. ISO talks about the sensitivity to light, which comes from film photography, because basically when you buy a roll of film, you have a set ISO for different films. So different types of film have different light sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so with a digital camera, what's really cool is you can manually set your ISO to a whole range that's much wider range than what you would get with film. And you can change it every single photo. Where with film, you're stuck with the same ISO for the whole roll.
Okay.
And so light sensitivity, the only downside to it is, you did get the numbers right. The lower number means it's less sensitive to light, which means your picture is going to come out darker. Higher number means it's more sensitive to light, which means you're going to get more light and more color in your photo. The downside is the higher you go with ISO, the more grainy it gets. And the more modern cameras, especially mirrorless, you have a whole bunch of technology that works this out for you and you don't have to worry about it so much. But that is your one thing. You want to be careful. Higher ISO, more grainy.
Okay, and which one is it that if you move your hand like that, it kind of just stays? Does that make any sense? The blurry...
The blur?
Yeah, that it, like, it's
called
slow.
motion blur.
That's the word.
There you go. That one is shutter speed.
Okay.
So where you're playing with motion blur or a freeze frame image is your shutter stop. And it's basically very simple. It's probably the easiest of them all to remember.
Okay.
It is how quickly your shutter opens and closes.
All right, and then it goes in like 0.seconds and seconds?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're, for instance, okay, I remember because you told me I was trying to take photos of stars, which by the way is not easy. And she was telling me to like change the shutter speed on that one. Mm-hmm. So if it like But if you're taking a video, because I work mainly in video, not in photo, but like if you're taking a video and you have a longer shutter speed, like a 1 second shutter speed, then you're gonna have motion blur on your videos, which I made that mistake one time because I feel like this is probably quite a common thing if you've got yourself a fancy camera or you're trying to shoot in like whatever fancy mode on your iPhone or your Android. Like I just adjusted and adjusted until I had like it didn't look overexposed and it didn't look underexposed, which are words I do know. And then I was taking the video and I looked at the video afterward and there was so much motion blur because I adjusted the shutter speed and instead of adjusting like the ISO and the f-stop. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I feel like shutter speed, even though it's, in my opinion, the easiest, it was the first one of these little gadgets and things that I learned. And there are also modes in your camera that you can adjust one of the three, and the camera automatically adjusts the rest to make sure the picture is correctly exposed. So that's something for beginners that's really helpful. And so the one that I started out using originally was the time value. And so on most cameras, it would be a T with a little V, like capital T with a little V next to it. So it's a time value, which means you set the shutter speed, how quickly the shutter opens and closes, and the rest the camera automatically sets for you.
Why did I not know this?
The one that people will most commonly use, which I didn't do, most photographers will start out with it's a PV. I actually don't know what the P stands for. Some cameras have a different little abbreviation, and that one is your aperture priority. And so basically there you set your aperture, and why that one is important is a lot of people when they're shooting portraits like to have a low depth of field, which we'll explain with aperture just in a second. And so then the rest of it gets set, but I was very into like motion blur and these things, so that's why I chose the time value instead. So that takes us to aperture, which is your f-stop, and I think the most confusing of all three.
Yeah, explain to me one thing. Why is it f-stop and then aperture? Is that what? How does that even? Is that like when you have the periodic table and iron is like F?
So
F-E.
It's something like, so your f-stop is a measurement. Same as like with the shutter speed. You call it shutter speed, but you measure it in seconds and fractions of seconds.
Okay. I feel like I'm going to absorb the how-to better than the explanation right now.
Well, the thing is, I don't even personally remember all the technical things. That's not my personal strength. Like, I cannot tell you, oh, this is the guy that invented this one and that one, but I can tell you how to use it, and that's the important part.
Yeah, that is the important bit.
And I know where to go look up all these things and stuff, but I don't think it is as important to know the name of the guy that invented the f-stops or ISO, or what ISO actually stands for. I think it's fun and interesting to know that it's a word, not an initialism, thank you. But it's not that important to know what it really, like, where it came from.
Right. The function is the important
part. The function is the important part. So with f-stop, aperture, what you're looking at mainly is depth of field, but also it does affect how much light goes into your lens.
Okay.
So a low f-stop is going to let a lot of light into your lens.
Okay.
And that's what makes this one confusing, because the lower your f-stop, the bigger the opening of your lens is. And I don't know who invented that, and it's confusing, but you just gotta, you just gotta memorize that one, and you're gonna, it'll make sense the more you do it. But so yes, the thing is with this, at the same time, when you've got that low f-stop, you've got a very shallow depth of field.
Low f-stop, more light in, shallow depth of field.
And so to explain depth of field, you know that fancy setting on your iPhone where you go into portrait mode, and Android also does it now, but I think iPhone was the first one to do it, where you say portrait mode and then it makes everything in the background blurry, that is a shallow depth of field.
Okay.
So then the deeper your depth of field goes, the higher your f-stop is. The thing that is important to know, just because you have a shallow depth of field does not mean that you're getting the most crisp photo.
Okay.
So actually, the most crisp photos usually are somewhere between 8 and 11 f-stop.
8 and 11, okay.
Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a medium depth of field, but that's where, if you like did some test shots with like a coin or something, that's where the lines are the most crisp and everything is perfect and you can really, really see the detail. So I do tend to shoot, like a lot of portrait photographers do lean toward a more shallow depth of field, a lower f-stop. It lets more light in because it is a bigger opening. It's easier to work with. If you really want beautiful, crisp photos, and especially a lot of landscape photographers use this, they go for the mid-ranges. And if you want a really, really far depth of field, you go for the higher ranges, but then you need a lot of light.
Okay. Because it lets in less light.
Yeah. Because then your little opening for your lens becomes very, very small, and it doesn't let in a lot of light, but it's going to have very far, your foreground's going to be in focus, and your furthest background, everything's going to be in focus.
Okay.
Which is great. It's really, really amazing to work with that. But yeah, so that one's definitely going to be your most complicated one, I will admit. And if you're just starting out, I suggest go for a low f-stop. It's going to be easy. You just have to realize that you make sure your subject is in focus, because otherwise they will be blurry and something else is going to be very crisp and it's going to make no sense to you. Which brings me to the final thing, focus. It's not a setting. It's dynamic, but if you're using autofocus, be careful, because autofocus is not always as intelligent as you think it is. So you might be focused on something even really close to your subject, like where we're sitting here. It could be that it's focused on the couch here, and we're here, so we're just slightly out of focus.
Okay, I get you.
And sometimes it's something as simple as like you and I are at different focal lengths relative to the camera. So maybe it's focused on me, and meaning you're slightly out of focus, or it's focused on you and I'm that kind of thing. So yes, manual focus is difficult and it's going to take a lot of time. I'm not saying you have to use manual focus, but just check your autofocus because you can adjust it.
Right.
Yeah, and then you were talking about videography. I think it's funny because we think less about these things when it comes to videography, or at least I do. You're like, it's a video. Shutter speed doesn't matter, because you were saying that. It still matters. All of this still matters with video. Sometimes you can cover it up a little bit more, but it all still matters. So yeah, those are the technical bits. Now, hopefully we can get to some more creative stuff. Do you have any questions on what we've said so far?
No, I think I just need to practice them and get them in my mind. On the creative side, though, something that you've mentioned to me before that I was hoping maybe you could expand on is you were talking about, I don't know how to put it, but basically like cropping down a lot with a photo. And like instead of taking a photo of like a huge sort of space or even like a medium-sized space, like you go down and you focus down on a specific part of that.
Yeah. I think if there's 2 tips that I can give on the creative side to anyone who's trying to take better photos, that's probably my number 1 tip, is cut things out of your photo. Because what we don't realize, our brains do this automatically. Like right now, you're sitting in front of me, and they can't see this, but there's a doorway right behind you, and then there's a kitchen in there, and there's a whole lot of stuff on the counter.
Right.
But my brain is not thinking about that. My brain is just thinking about you because I'm talking to you.
Right.
And so a good photo is going to just crop your face, and it's probably going to have a lower f-stop, so that's pretty far behind you. It's going to be kind of blurred. That's going to be a good photo. But what most people are going to try and do is they're going to try and take not just your face, they're going to try and take your whole body in the photo, and they're going to try and make sure everything's in focus in the background too. Although there's like a tendency, you know, with portrait mode and all that. Yeah, I get it. I see you. You do that way too much. You need to let up on portrait mode. But anyway, so think, look, what can I cut out of this to make this better? That's like your number one thing. How do I cut out? And be ruthless. Like, I don't think you can ever crop a photo too much. Like, quite honestly, especially if you're starting out. Like, if you're scared of cropping too much, you will not crop too much.
Okay.
And then the other thing is do multiple angles. Because, again, there's two sides to this. One, we think that everybody sees the world from our viewpoint. And that's just, no. We're all different heights, tall, what do you call that? What
heights and builds.
We're all different heights and builds. We all have different perspective on the world, just physically, like from where we're looking. And the other side is we have different ways of viewing. Like, even in your own life, like, you can see the TV from where you're sitting here. That's another thing. There's a TV over there.
There's a TV right there, yeah.
But you can see the TV from where we're sitting, or you could be standing and looking at it. Or, and like, have you ever just like sat in like an environment that you're very used to and just sat in a different position? Like, let's say you go to a coffee shop and you always sit at the same table. And then one day you decide to just sit at a different table, and it just changes your perspective of the whole room, and you suddenly realize things you've never seen before. Yeah. And the same goes for photography. If you're looking for something interesting, try an angle that's different. And you're going to get some really horrible angles, but just do more and more angles, and you're going to find things that works for you. And it's going to be visually interesting because it's going to be from a perspective that people don't see.
Yeah. Okay, I hear that.
Yeah. So you ready to go out and test this?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. Okay.
I'm about to tie up my hair. This is getting serious.
Okay, so we've gone outside and we have a Canon, what's this?
It's a 50R50.
Canon R50, which is a very nice entry low-level camera that you can play around with.
Mirrorless.
Very, very... I don't have a mirrorless, so that part, you know, she one-upped me. But anyway...
And I'm shooting with an 18 to 45 millimeter. Yo, did I just say milliliter? Millimeter.
Maybe you do more baking than you do photography.
I mean, that is fact.
Anyway, we're going to go out and see what we can get.
Ik zie een baie mooi blommetjie. Oh, sorry, I should say that in English. I'm seeing a very pretty flower. And I saw it in Afrikaans because that's where beauty lies, ne? Okay, let's see if I can get in here without destroying plant life. So, switching to manual mode because I've got an AV and a TV, by the way, on my camera. Right. And what's this?